The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to today's webinar on test estimation. I'm Rex Black. I'm president of RBCS. We are a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm, and we serve clients that range from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. We've been around since 1994, delivering insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. We have a team of international consultants that deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for customers that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. Of 10 books on software testing. I would include the best-selling Managing the Testing Process and some new ebooks on testing metrics and improving the testing process and improving the software process. You can get those ebooks on our website and I believe also on Amazon. We are presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. You can check out their website at www.softwaretestpro.com. Attending today's webinar may earn you credit for QAI and ASQ recertification. Check with them to determine what how you qualify for that. Typically that's going to involve saving the attendee email, and you'll receive that after this webinar. Attendance at today's webinar definitely earns you PMI PDUs. Thank you to Ken Young for reviewing the materials for PDU status and making valuable suggestions. You can visit PMI.org to claim the PDUs. Use the code TEBO100. Our provider ID is 2986. You will receive that information in your attendee email that you'll receive after the course, after the webinar, so no need to ask me to repeat that. Now, PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. You can't claim them if you're listening to this recorded. Now, before we start the presentation, a couple housekeeping notes. If you have any questions, submit them at any time via the webinar interface. But please note that they are only answered at the end of the presentation, so I won't see them if you're submitting them now. I'll see them later. The presentation is posted on the web, rbcs-us.com. Go to the Resources tab in the upper middle of that page, navigate to the Basic Library page, and you will find them at the bottom of the Basic Library. Also, you have been automatically registered for the free e-learning drawing. Check your email over the next couple days and watch the spam filter. You may be the lucky winner this month. If you're having any problems, audio or visual components, please contact GoToWebinar support. Generally, when these problems happen, they're one of three things. Either you've got browser incompatibility with GoToWebinar, so try a different browser. Your company has a firewall or security software set up to block access to the Citrix website or to block downloads of the Citrix software onto your PC, in which case that would have to be unblocked. Or you could have audio setting issues on your PC, so you can check the audio settings. Hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. Now, today's presentation is on test estimation. How many testers, how many tests, how many bugs, how long will the testing take? These are all challenging questions, and fortunately there are some ways to get answers to them. So what we want is to come up with an estimate, and it's important to keep in mind that we want a good estimate. Not necessarily an estimate that makes people happy, but a good one, one that is accurate in its prediction of where the project's going to go, how long it's going to take, one that is realistic. It includes all of the tasks that we're actually going to have to carry out. And how long those tasks are going to take, and what the risks are, how we're going to mitigate those risks. And the estimate should be actionable. Clearly assigned ownership to people, people who are committed to make the work happen, clearly assigned resources that are known to be available on the dates on which they will be needed, clearly understood dependencies between different tasks, and with the appropriate understanding of what that means for a critical path. Now, how do we go about getting such an estimate together? That will be the topic of what we discuss today. The general process would be talk to experts and owners about how long things will take and what needs to be done and so forth. When I say owners here, I mean owners of the particular tasks that need to be carried out. Look at metrics, look at industry averages, at how long things have taken in the past and how long things typically take on other projects and other organizations. And finally, this is a part of the process that is often forgotten. Negotiate. Be ready to negotiate with managers and stakeholders. I think sometimes what happens is that we come up with estimates as test managers and we put them forward and people say, that's too long, it's going to cost too much. And we go, okay. And then we go off and we cut it. And that's not really the way it ought to work. There ought to be a discussion where we say, look, if you want this particular level of risk mitigation, then this is the amount of testing that needs to happen, and this is how much it's going to cost you. And if they say, well, we can't afford that or we can't take that long, then you have to have a discussion about, okay, what level of risk are you willing to accept? That's what I mean by negotiation. Now, it helps to understand in a negotiation what your counterpart's expectations are. What are they expecting you to do? What are they thinking of when they think about testing? What do they expect the final result to be, the overall outcome? And there are basically four typical kinds of manager and stakeholder expectations that I've run into, three of them are not a problem from negotiating a reasonable test estimate and budget perspective, and one of them is. So the first one here, top of the list, is they might be saying, look, no matter what it costs and no matter how long it takes, I want to make sure that the test basis is completely covered. Now, the test basis is just whatever your tests are based on. So if you're doing risk-based testing, that would be your list of risks tested to whatever depth you had agreed they needed to be tested. If you're doing requirements-based testing, and that would be covering all of the requirements. If you're doing a regression-averse approach to testing, that would be making sure that all of your regression tests have been completely run. And of course, you could be using a blended strategy where you're covering risks and covering requirements and covering your automated tests and so forth. So that's one set of expectations. Now, you might be looking at that and going, man, that must be a nice life. You mean they're going to give me all the money and time I need to do the testing? That's great. Well, yeah, but I've worked on projects like that, and we've had clients that live in that situation, and it's not all milk and cookies, without a doubt. The testing can still be very difficult. It's just that with respect to the resources you need, your life as a manager might not be so difficult in terms of getting the resources you need and getting the time that you need. Now, the next one down is, again, livable from an estimation point of view. It's the expectation that you're going to do as much as you can within the schedule constraints. To any reasonable level, you can get as much money as you need. You can get as much resources as you need, but you have to be done by a particular date. Okay, so from an estimation point of view, this is definitely quite livable in the sense that if they say takes too long, then you go back and you look and see, okay, is there any way by throwing additional resources at it I can make it go faster? If so, then you do that up until the point where maybe there simply aren't any resources left. But usually what will happen is before you hit that point, you would get to the point where there's simply no way to make it go faster by throwing more resources at it, so that the schedule constraint effectively determines what doesn't get tested or what doesn't get tested as much as some people might like. Now, the third expectation here, again, livable. Do as much testing as you can, but it has to be done by date X and within cost Y. That there is a hard upper limit on the schedule and the cost. So, again, from an estimation point of view, negotiating the estimate, no problem. You just go back and say, All right, well, if that's all we can do, then here are your options. We can cut depth and preserve breadth. We can cut breadth and preserve depth. We can do some mix of that. You know, where are you comfortable taking more risk? Where are you comfortable taking less risk? And you can then negotiate based on that. But you can have an open conversation about what's possible within the constraints, and as long as all of the stakeholders are on one of these three expectations, and they're all on it, they agree on which expectation applies, then you should have no trouble negotiating the schedule and the estimate. You might be saying, well, gee, I'm definitely having a lot of trouble. Maybe something else is going on. That might be the fourth item that's on the list with the red X next to it. That's the break the iron triangle expectation. This is the expectation that I can arbitrarily set the level of quality that's to be delivered without paying attention to schedule and budget constraints that I've also set for a given set of features. So let's take a look at it. Some people call this, talk about this as a triple constraint, but I prefer to think of it as the iron box and triangle. So starting, let me get a highlighter up here. This can help us. The first thing that typically happens on a project is that there's some set of features that's going to be desired. Now, these features might be built sequentially, they might be built incrementally, they might change over time, but generally, a project is going to start. We've got some idea of we need to build this stuff. We need these new features to be defined. So that basically defines the scope of the project, which I've shown here as a box. Okay, next thing that often happens, and sometimes these are happening at exactly the same time, is that some sort of target date is set. We want this set of features, and we want it to be delivered by this date. Okay, so that has the effect of drawing a line in the box. Now, the length of these lines, this is just a metaphor. Don't take it too far. Don't try to get all analytical on it. But basically, that is saying, okay, this puts a line in the box. All right. Then the third thing that usually happens is that, that's interesting, you can't draw below a certain point. Oops. I apologize for that. I tried to draw below a certain point on the graph, and it did something not happy. Oh, let me put this over here. Okay, this is number 3. Select cost. So, with the schedule and the features in place, then a lot of times people will go off and say preliminary budget. And I'm sure some of you have been in this situation where there's some project manager or program manager, and he's running down the hallway, or she's running down the hallway. In the hallway, that the person stops and says, hey, you know that new project? And you're like, yeah, the one I heard about yesterday, and I got exactly one paragraph of description about. Yeah, that one. I need some preliminary numbers from you on how much resource we're going to need for that. And I need those in an email from you in the next 15 minutes because I'm going into a meeting and I need to have a preliminary budget. Sure, some of you have been in that situation. Maybe a lot of you have been in that situation. I know I have. And then, of course, you wrap that all over the place with caveats about assuming this and assuming that and blah, 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 blah. Don't hold me to these numbers is usually a sentence that figures somewhere in there. And then, of course, you kind of do get held to those numbers. That's the way that ends up working. Now, here's the thing, is that if features have been defined and the schedule has been set and this cost has been set, we have effectively drawn a box and we put 2 lines in it where the 2 lines that are there share one endpoint, but not both endpoints. They're not collinear. And effectively then, the line that connects those represents the level of quality that you're going to get. Now, again, I'm not saying longer line means more quality, shorter line means less. I'm just saying that the level of quality that you're going to achieve has now been set by the constraints. And this is just, any process, any software engineering process has a certain level of capability, and it can be measured. You can measure, for example, your test team's defect detection effectiveness, and I encourage you to do that. And what you will tend to see is if the process is stable, the process will achieve a more or less similar level of defect detection effectiveness within some sort of range of natural variability of the process. It's exactly the same in terms of the level of defects that are going to be present in the product. If the software engineering process is not changing, then the level of defects that are going to be put into the code by the developers, the level of defects that will be detected by you and your testing team during testing, and the level of defects that will be removed that were detected by your test team, those are all going to be fairly characteristic and stable numbers. So the quality is going to be whatever it's going to be. Now, this is where you get into the breaking the iron triangle. If people assume that I can set the features, I can set the schedule, I can set the cost, and then I can hold the test manager accountable for making sure that we don't have any bugs in the software, that's where you're going to run into trouble. And if that is the operative assumption in your organization, you have a much bigger problem than an estimation problem. You have a political problem with respect to unachievable objectives being defined for your testing organization. And no amount of estimation best practices are going to fix that. So that gets to defining what your mission is and defining what you're there to do, the topics that I've discussed in other webinars, and we'll probably at some point discuss in a future webinar. I discussed that topic briefly, and I believe it was the last webinar on test policy, strategies, and plans. At some point I will probably revisit that. But anyway, if you have an expectation issue that you as the test manager have a bag of magic quality pixie dust, and you're going to just walk into the project at the very end and sprinkle that on the code, and all the bugs are going to fly out and die, then you have to fix that expectation. Now, if you are dealing with one of the three achievable expectations, then notice that if you come back and say, look, the level of testing that I'm going to be able to do within those constraints is going to be insufficient, then at that point, of course, we can always iterate and change the schedule, change the features, change the cost, some of the above, all of the above, to try to achieve a better level of quality. Now, assuming that we've figured out how we're going to handle the negotiation part of this, then at that point it makes sense to start putting together the estimate. And one place to start is to create what's called a work breakdown structure. Now, a lot of you might be familiar with applications like Microsoft Project. It can be used to create a work breakdown structure, or what's sometimes referred to as a Gantt chart, though the Gantt chart is really just a representation of a work breakdown structure. A work breakdown structure is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a hierarchical decomposition of the work to be done for a project, starting at the highest level of abstraction, in which case we can say testing, and then breaking it down hierarchically into stages, and then into activities, and then ultimately into tasks, and maybe even subtasks if necessary. The general rule of thumb is that the task at the lowest level, the leaf nodes, if you will, in the breakdown, should be short. 1-2 days long. Maybe a week. But if you're up longer than that, then you're going to start to lose resolution in your work breakdown structure, and if you try to track against it, you're going to find that things get behind, and then you're behind, then you didn't actually know it. So this is the inch pebbles as well as milestones idea, be able to measure progress at a fine-grained level. Also, tasks should have a single owner. Now, we haven't gotten into that question of owner yet, but that's another thing to keep in mind. We'll talk about that in a minute. If you've got a task that has two owners, ideally you'd break that down into subtasks that would have single owners. This has to do with accountability, and it also has to do with getting a good estimate. Now, there are a couple ways that I like to approach creating a work breakdown structure for a project. There's the thinking forward and thinking backward. So thinking forward is, I think, what most people do when they create a work breakdown structure for anything, which is they go, okay, here I am, I'm in the planning stage right now. What happens next? I've done projects like this before, so what happens next? And they think back and they go, oh, okay, yeah. So they're thinking forward in the sense of they're like going, okay, first I do this, and then 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 I do this. All right? And that's perfectly valid. That's a perfectly valid way to go about this. The thing is that that might not get you everything you need. You might end up missing some stuff that way. So I also talk about thinking backward. So when I say thinking backward, what I'd say here is, let's assume that you're doing risk-based testing. You've done a risk analysis. And definitely if you're doing risk-based testing, you need to do a risk analysis before you can do your estimate, because this is what your scope of testing is. So I've done my risk analysis. I look at the risk analysis and I go, okay, what kinds of tests am I going to need to run to cover these risks? Now, of course, you don't know down to the specific test cases at this point. They've yet to be developed. But you should be, as an experienced test manager, able to look at a collection of risk categories and when the ratings of the risks within those categories, go, okay, I see how I need to do this. Like if performances, there's a number of key performance risk items that have been identified. Obviously, you're going to need a performance test suite, right? If robustness is a big issue, then you're going to need to have a good error handling test suite, right? These are just things that you're going to have to address. Now, if you're doing a requirements-based approach, it's kind of the same sort of thing. You got to look at the requirements, go, okay, I'm going to need a test for this kind of area of functionality and this area of functionality, this area of functionality. Just be careful that you don't forget non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements are often not very well documented. So I got my requirements, I got my risks, maybe both. I've got my regression test set if I'm doing that too. And I go, okay, these are the things I'm going to need to do. This is going to tell me what needs to happen during test execution. And then you work your way back up the chain, and this is where the thinking backward comes in. So then I can say, all right, so I know, and I'm going to do the highlighter here, I know what I need to do in terms of execution because I know the key areas that I'm going to need to test. So in terms of developing my tests, what do I need to develop? If you don't have, for example, existing performance test capabilities and data and so forth, it's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to develop those particular tests. Maybe you don't have a performance test environment, so okay, we're going to have to set that up. Maybe you don't have anybody in your team that knows how to do performance testing, so I'm going to have to bring somebody on, bring on a contractor, get some training done for some people. Maybe even there needs to be a special performance test plan because you don't want to try to address that in your other plan. It doesn't fit. Maybe you're in an agile world and the functionality is being built on an iteration by iteration basis. The performance testing is something that's going to happen sort of outside of the sprints as its own separate thing, and so you decide you want to have a separate plan for that. So that's what I mean by thinking backwards. Thinking about what you're doing and what you're going to be doing during test execution, and then figuring out what you need to do to lay out the groundwork for that. Now, with a preliminary set of tasks identified, you can start working with the team, your test team, go through a review of the tasks, maybe identify some new tasks, and start putting sizing on the tasks. Now, there are two basic techniques here. I won't say theoretical techniques. They're not theoretical. They're project management techniques. One is referred to as the Delphic Oracle. In the Delphic Oracle, you get estimates from each team member, and ideally you get the estimates in such a way that they don't know what the other people have estimated when they're estimating. You don't want anybody biasing the other person. Um, and then you reveal those estimates. So I could go through, I could distribute the work breakdown structure to the entire team and ask them to write down next to each task how long they think it's going to take, right? How much, what's the effort required for it? And then you go through a review of that, and that ends up, that reveals whether we have agreement. If people agree on tasks, we go, okay, great, that either we're all completely wrong or that's how long that's going to take. What you might find is that some people estimate high and some people estimate low. And you find the people with the most extreme high and low estimates, and you ask them to explain that to the team. And then you go off and do another session of sizing those tasks that you haven't gotten agreement on. And you come back and you do another reveal of that and see, okay, you know, where are we now in terms of agreement? And if you still haven't gotten convergence on some tasks, you might then repeat it again and use the average. Those of you who've worked on an Agile project will perhaps recognize this as the basis for what's called planning poker. It's a planning poker is sort of a stripped down, lightweight version of the Delphic Oracle, in the sense of people are to size on their own and then reveal their sizing to the others and then discuss that. Now, another technique that you can use is what's called the three-point technique. So what you have people do is estimate the best case, worst case, and expected case for each task. And the expected case is what you're going to use for your estimate, but you're also going to look at best case and worst case. Project management theory says that if you construct three work breakdown structures, one which is based on all the best case and the other is based on all of the worst case, that gives you an idea of your estimate accuracy. And this gets into something that I'm not going to discuss here in any depth, but you can do some research on this on the internet. It's what's called the cone of uncertainty. Basically, by looking at the variance between the best case and the worst case, that can give you a sense of what your cone of uncertainty is, the percentage of variation that you are at this particular point. You know, so let's say a best case says this project's going to take us 6 months, and worst case says that it's going to take us 18 months, and the expected case says it's going to take us 12 months. And basically what we have is 50% level of uncertainty. And the actual could be kind of anywhere within there. 50%, by the way, wouldn't if you're there at the beginning of a project, you're in really good shape, because in many cases in the cone of uncertainty at the beginning of a project can actually be as big as 400%, which is scary. The combination of these two techniques is called the wideband, by the way. So if we're doing both of these things, a hybrid of both of these things, then we're doing what's called a wideband. So this will help us get initial effort estimates for each of the tasks and get those in place, and sanity check our tasks. Again, working with the test team members to figure out how long things will take. Now, you also have to make sure that you set up the dependencies between the different tasks within your work breakdown structure. So there are a general process for this would be to go through your tasks and figure out which tasks have no predecessors. So those can start now. Excuse me. And then you identify tasks that depend only on the previously identified tasks. So you go, the first time around, you're going to go, okay, I have 5 tasks that have no predecessors. What other tasks depend on one or more of those 5 tasks? Identify those dependencies. Then you go back. Let's say now there's 5 tasks with no dependency, with no predecessors, and 10 tasks that have only one or more of those 5 tasks as predecessors. So now you've got 15 tasks that you've identified. And then you go through and you say which tasks are dependent on one or more of those 15 tasks. You repeat that step until all of the dependencies have been identified for all of the tasks. Now, on a small project where, say, you got 40 or 50 tasks and you can pretty much see all the tasks at once, keep them all straight in your head, you can do this in Microsoft Project, for example. Medium to large projects, a better way to do this is to use index cards or sticky notes and a whiteboard. You divide up the whiteboard into weeks or months, depending on the size of the project, and then you write down the task names on index cards or sticky notes, and you stick them up there, and you draw arrows connecting them together to show the dependencies are. Once you get that all up there, then you would put that in a Microsoft project or some other project management tool. Now, at that point, you can do what's called critical path analysis. And a critical path is any sequence of dependent tasks such that if any one of those tasks got delayed, all the successor tasks would end up slipping, and that would cause the project end date to delay. Your last task would end up getting pushed out. That's why it's called the critical path, because it's a path through the dependencies of tasks that is critical to the success of the project from a schedule point of view. We can also have what's called a near critical path, which is sequences of tasks where you could tolerate a day or two slip on tasks in that sequence, but if you get up above that, like say a week or 2 weeks, that's going to affect the end date of the project. Typical things that tend to be on the critical path, there's things that affect phase entry, test phase entry and exit criteria, like when can we start and end system test. Things that have to do with how many cycles of testing we're going to need to do, how many bugs we're going to find. Those are topics we'll address in a moment here. And there can also be external dependencies that can create issues. So make sure that you understand those, because that's where your main project risks live, is on the critical and the near critical path. Now, resources. I mentioned the need to assign resources earlier. What kind of resources are we talking about? Well, talking about people, test environments, test tools, those kind of things. So in terms of people, you can have people at various skill levels that you're going to assign based on the availability and the specific task, etc. One of the things that's important to keep in mind here is that if you assign someone with a lower level of skill to something, it will increase both the effort and the duration associated with a task. And when people are giving estimates, the accuracy of their estimate for a task depends on their skill level with it. Now, those are two fairly obvious statements, but they do have some interesting implications. One is, remember, we were just talking about using the team's wisdom to figure out how long things were going to take. Well, one of the reasons that you want to not have the revealing of the estimation initially, the reason you want to hide that during the initial estimate on the Delphic Oracle, is that otherwise what will happen is everybody is going to make their predictions, usually not thinking about who's likely to be assigned to a particular task, but thinking about how long it would take them. So when somebody's giving you an estimate for a task, they're not answering the generic question, how long is it going to take to finish this? They're asking, how long is it going to take me to finish this? And the issue is that if somebody is perceived as having expertise in a particular area, people might tend to defer. When that person says, oh, that takes 5 days, people go, oh, well, I guess that's how long it takes. They don't connect the dots and go, oh, well, that's how long it would take him. He could do it in 5 days, but for me, it would take like 10 days, right? So it's important to keep that in mind, that if you're going to end up assigning somebody who's other than the ideal person, you have to then adjust the effort and duration based on that. Also, if the estimation has been done and you know, well, we actually don't have anybody that really understands these tasks because we've never done them before, that's a big risk for you, because that means that that's an area of your estimate that could quite easily be a complete work of creative writing. Now, in terms of environments, you want to make sure that you have those properly assigned and thought through, and also with tools, make sure that you figured out those. You don't want to omit any of those and then discover later, oh my God, I don't have X. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cost thing. It can be a lead time thing, a criticality thing. I had a multi-million-dollar test environment brought to a dead halt once by the absence of a $5 cable. Very frustrating situation. We were unable to proceed with our testing for days based on that. And you want to talk about something that will drive you crazy. That definitely will do it. Now, some mistakes not to make here. The little red slashes at the bottom. Let me discuss those. First, assuming that by putting 2 people on a task, it'll be done in half the time. This is so famous that there's, of course, the great joke about, 9 women cannot make a baby in a month. There's a book called The Mythical Man Month, which the title is all about this, that you can just say, well, if I've got a 50-man month project, and if I have 10 people available, it'll be twice as fast as 5 people. Well, maybe or maybe not. Depends on a lot of complicated issues. So don't just assume that you can do that. Be careful about putting too much stuff going on at once in the test environment. Sharing automated regression tests and manual functional tests when the data is going to be interacting is a mistake that I've seen people make. Getting beyond your tool licenses, another mistake that people make. And then, of course, you've got to make sure that you figured out, well, how long is it going to take to set up the environments and tools, and who's going to handle the support of those, and where are those tasks. If you forget those in your schedule, you will be doomed to have a number of fairly unpleasant surprises. Okay, now, what we've discussed so far will do a pretty good job of handling your estimation of the analysis, design, implementation of your tests. But when it gets to the point where you're actually running them, this tends to be a little harder to do because, there's two things that determine how long it's going to take you to run the tests, basically. One is how long it takes to run every test once. And the other is how many bugs you're going to find. Now, the how long to run every test once part is pretty much within your control, the most part. I'll explain how you make sure it's in your control in a minute. The how long to get the bugs out, that's a little bit more out of your control, because the question there is then, of course, well, how many bugs are in it, right? So, excuse me, one of the things that you're going to try to do that I suggest that you try to do, not just from an estimation point of view, but actually when you go to running the test, try to have an organized, orderly, consistent process that occurs during test execution. Try to make it all as predictable as possible. The reason I say that is that test execution is all about exploring the unknown in many ways, and there's necessarily going to be a whole lot of unpredictability that's involved there. Try to take as much unknown off the table as you can, so that you save your reaction and your brain space, problem-solving time, for solving problems that actually could not have been solved in advance. There will generally be plenty of those during test execution. You'll have plenty to do. So I like to have nice, consistent test cycles. I like to understand how I'm going to balance my scripted and exploratory testing. I want to have a clearly thought out strategy for how I'm going to do regression testing as things change. I want to think about what percentage of the people's time is going to be spent doing confirmation testing, what percentage of what's called on-task time the testers have. I found that like 6 hours in a 9 to 10 hour day for contractors is fairly typical. It can be as little as 4 hours in an 8-hour day for employees. So know what that is, and then try to predict the number of tests. So what you see on this slide here, this is a picture that shows what the different cycles look like. It's assuming a sequential life cycle model. And what happens is we have test releases, let me get this up, dropping in here. Okay, each one of those is a release dropping in. This is a weekly release. Again, this is assuming a sequential life cycle. And then each pass represents one complete iteration through the tests. Okay. Now, in each cycle, what you see is that there's time set aside for confirmation testing, time set aside for exploratory testing, well, about 1 day each, so about 40% of the test execution time is set aside for confirmation testing and exploratory testing, and then we have about 60% of the time set aside for our scheduled manual and automated tests. So we want to know how many days it's going to take to get through the testing, and what we'd have to do is go, okay, so I know that I've got 3 days per week basically to run the tests, and then there's 20% of time doing confirmation testing for bug fixes and 20% doing exploratory testing. So I got 3 days per week, and let's say I've got 6 testers, so that's 18 person days per week, and let's say that we assume that each tester can spend 6 hours of actual fingers on the keyboard testing time. So that's 6 times 18, which is about 100, 108 to be precise, but let's just call it 100. So I can get 100 hours of testing done in a week. Now, let's say that I have, I've got some historical data that says that on average I have 5 test cases per risk item, and I've identified 50 risk items, pretty typical number for a smallish project. So now I know I'm going to have 250 test cases, right? And let's say that I know on average that each test case takes about an hour to run. So I've got about 250 hours of testing to do. So I said I had 108 hours of test execution would happen per week. So across 2 weeks, that would be 216 hours. So that's about 250, a little bit less, but it's you know, it's within shouting distance. It's within 10%, give or take 10 or 15%. So I'm going to say, you know what, I should be able to get through those tests in 2 weeks. So that's one pass of the testing. That's how long it's going to take me to run through the testing once. So you see what I relied on there is historical data from past projects. I need to have some data that says, you know, the number of test cases I have and the number of risk items, and I'm able to calculate an average. Now, it's important when you're doing some simple metrics-based estimation like that, that you have a significant amount of data. Hopefully it's more than just one past project, and that when you look at that average across multiple projects, the average is about the same. Now, the way that you would do that is calculate that average for each project and then statistically determine what the standard deviation is across those averages across the multiple projects. The smaller the standard deviation is, the more reliable that estimate is likely to be. If you have very large standard deviation, you might be calculating based on 2 very different types of projects, and you would need to disaggregate the data and figure out which type of project you're working in and calculate that way. So, for example, you wouldn't expect that estimation metrics from an Agile project would carry over very easily to a sequential project or vice versa. Okay, so I've got that figured out. But what I don't know is how many passes I'm going to have. I'm showing 3 here, but why would I say that there would need to be 3? Well, that would be based on how long it's going to take to get the bugs out. So this is a little challenging. You need to have good historical data. What you need to do basically is be able to predict how many bugs you're going to find. You need to start with that. Now, there's the technique is basically similar to what I just described. You have some sort of metric that sizes the project, and this can be the number of developer days. It can be the number of new and changed lines of code. It can be the number of function points. Usually the number of developer days is the easiest to get. And you say, okay, I'm going to look at past projects, and I'm going to look at how many developer days there were on those projects, and I'm going to look at how many bugs that we found in each of those projects. And that's going to give me the average number of bugs per developer day for each project. Again, same as before, calculate your standard deviation, make sure that that's across the different averages for the different projects. Make sure that that's something that is meaningful. Assuming that it is, you can now say, all right, go to the development manager, how many developer days you have planned for this project, and use that to predict the number of bugs. Now, of course, you're relying on the reliability of his or her schedule, her estimate of the number of estimated developer days. One way to correct for that is go back and look historically what the estimated number of developer days was versus the actual number of developer days at the end of the project. And if there's tends to be a 20 or 30 or 40% creep on that, you would just adjust that into whatever number that you were given. So that's going to tell you what the number of bugs is. So if you look at this chart here, that's going to say, okay, I'm going to find this many bugs. So now I got to figure out, well, how long is it going to take me to find them? And what you can do is you can go, okay, I'm going to look at past projects, and I'm going to look at what percentage of the bugs were found in the first cycle of testing, the second cycle of testing. So here's the first cycle, the second cycle, third cycle, etc. What you'll probably find is that there is some sort of pattern there, and either you have a period of time where you don't find a lot of bugs, and then all of a sudden you're finding a lot of bugs, and then it levels off, or you've got something that's more C-shaped like this here. Look at your past defect curves and see what kind of curve you tend to get, and then and fit a curve based on your historical experience. You also have to look at, what's the number of bugs that a tester can find per day, and make sure that you don't assume that you're exceeding that. So you're going to do some curve fitting here, and that's going to allow you to push out to the point at which you will have found all of the defects, right? That is on this graph occurs right around here. Then you have to also look at the rate at which defects historically have been fixed, how many defects have been fixed over a given period of time, how long, what's the lag period, and you can fit this curve as well onto there. So that's one way to do it. Now, another way of doing this that is maybe a little easier to do is look at a metric that's called the closure period, which is the average time from discovery to resolution for defects. If your average closure period is, let's say, 10 days, and it's pretty stable across projects and within projects, then maybe you just go, okay, we're going to find the last bug here. So this plus 10 days is when we think that last bug will be fixed, so that's when we're going to be done. So this is sometimes called a defect removal model. The spreadsheet for this is on the, I think it's the basic library. It might be the advanced library. You can download it there. Pretty easy to find there. It's a pretty straightforward thing, and it's surprising. People look at that and go, "Oh, gee, that'll never work. That's just too simple. That can't possibly be a successful technique." We have one client that does projects where the test periods, well, the releases are every 2 years, and the test periods are a year long. And they use a defect removal model to predict their test end dates, and they get that to within plus or minus, I think it's 10%. Which is pretty good. To be able to predict when you're going to be done testing, and plus or minus 10% is really good. And that comes down to a month and a half variation. And so, on a 2-year long project, to be able to predict within plus or minus 2 months when you're going to be done, that's good. So these do work, and we've seen other clients have equal success with them. So, they work. Of course, what I've been just describing to you, both of these things rely on historical data, reliable historical data, so you do have to make sure that you've got that. Okay, so that's a overview of test estimation. Basically, I'm trying to pack what is usually a 2-day course for us into a hour long or so webinar. There's a whole bunch more that I could say about this, a whole bunch more that I have said about it. You can find more information, of course, in that course, which we have, and it's live in e-learning, and also in some of my books I talk about estimation in great depth. But overall, estimation is definitely very difficult. I think it's just as hard as estimating the development side because it has all these external dependencies in it, and now of course there's certain things about it that make it a little more forgiving, if you will, in the sense that testing is almost infinitely compressible. In other words, we can spend as much time testing as we could possibly come up with and still not be done, in the sense of done like every possible test has been run. And we can always cut tests out if we're willing to accept additional risk. So that's a little different than the development estimation, because there's a sort of rock bottom minimum that if you don't spend this much time, you simply can't get that set of features. With testing, it's all about calibrating the right level of coverage. But the estimate has to be good in order to do that calibration of coverage. As a general rule, if you don't have a good estimate, you're going to end up under-testing. Either under-testing because you forgot things, or under-testing because you got your schedule and budget cut down and you couldn't defend your estimate, and then you find out, oh, there's all this other stuff that we didn't test. And, one of the things that I've sometimes joked about in these webinars is the issue of, I've heard of test managers being asked this question, and I've been asked this question personally. A bug happens in production, and someone comes back to me or whoever the test manager was and says, "Why didn't you find that in testing?" And I've never heard that same person go to the development managers and say, "Why did your developers put this in there?" Okay, so there's sort of a fundamental unfairness about that, but also there's a point there too that maybe what's behind that comment when we hear it is sometimes not just trying to shift blame, though that's probably an element of it, but also a plaintive tone of, you let me take a risk that I wasn't aware I was taking, and now that risk has come back to bite me. Why did you let me take that risk in ignorance? Why didn't you give me a better indication of what level of risk I was taking? So the techniques that I've been describing here are about doing the estimation in a way that not only says this is how long it's going to take to do the testing right, whatever we think right is, but also allows us to have a conversation about, if you are willing to accept a higher level of risk, this is what we can do to accelerate or reduce cost, or both. In order to do that, though, you have to be good at estimating. You have to master the basic estimation techniques. You also ideally have good historical data available to you that you're able to bring to the conversation, both from the point of view of knowing yourself how long things are going to take, and also from the point of view of explaining to others how long things are going to take. It's my experience very difficult to defend a test execution schedule, a proposed test execution schedule, when you can't point to historical data and say, look, this is how many tests we're going to have, plus or minus X, and this is how long it takes to run them, and this is how many bugs we're going to find, plus or minus X, and this is how long it takes to find and fix them. So you can do this. There's nothing that I've outlined here that's like earth-shattering or beyond anybody's capabilities. The math involved in doing the historical data estimation, there's nothing more complicated than division in there. A little bit of statistics, but you can do that on a calculator. Creating work breakdown structures, a very well understood process. There's a bazillion books out there on how to do it. Some of my books talk about how to do it specifically for testing. So, make sure that you master these things. This is a solvable problem. It's hard, but it is something that you can learn to do. and learn to do well. And if you intend to be a professional test manager throughout your career, I would suggest that you need to know this. Okay, so as always, I will put the advertisement up while I get the Q&A window undocked and resized in such a way that I can actually use it. Try not to say anything not nice about it. Okay, so got a question here from Javier. Thanks for the demo, Rex. Question: do you have some resolutions in cases where a new test effort has been incorporated into a software development project? How to carry out the metrics under motion? What negotiation should take place between development, QA, and management? Okay, so the new effort, I'm assuming that you're saying we don't have access to the historical metrics. Yeah, that's a problem. You know, you can try to use some industry numbers for that to try to fill in some blanks, try to make some reasonable assumptions about how long things take based on your own past experience. You can come up with a model that's based more on reasonable assumptions and industry metrics, and just try to explain to people, look, this is my best guess, and then of course, as you point out, you know, you would need to refine that as you go along through the project as you gain more understanding. Now, when you say what negotiations should usually take place between development, QA, and management, I mean, I've been thinking, when I was talking about the negotiation, I was referring mostly to negotiation with management to reach a agreement on the amount of time and money that was going to be made available, the resources and so forth. Now, with development, it's more about planning at this point. You're negotiating a plan between development and QAs with respect to things like how frequently am I going to get releases, and how long is it going to take for you to fix a bug? You know, what's the turnaround time on a bug fix, and those sort of things. It's more of just, you know, asking them and they tell you, and that has some impact on your estimate as well, of course, but you know, does need to be dealt with in the plan. Let's see. I have a couple interesting questions here. One from Carrie, which is 7, and another from Ravi, which is G. I have to admit that I'm not following those questions, Carrie and Ravi, so if you'd like to resubmit them, I'd be happy to answer them. Bill asks, hi, will this session be available on demand at a later date? Yes, it will. It is being recorded as we speak. I'm recording it right now. So on the recording, Bill, there will be a shout out to you personally, Mr. Bill Campbell. And that recorded version will be posted. It's on our YouTube channel, the RBCS YouTube channel. It is on the RBCS Digital Library, which again, go to the resources page on rbcs-us.com. Navigate to the library, then navigate to the digital library, and you will find the recorded webinars there, and that's the whole presentation. That's the video and the audio. And you also have an audio podcast available, which gets posted on iTunes. So you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, and you can listen to this presentation. Of course, it loses a little without the graphics, but you know, most of the content is still there. Michael asks, where does one find the industry standards? I think you meant like industry standard metrics that I mentioned. My main source for that is typically going to be one or more of Capers-Jones's books or studies. I think he's got really good data. I've used that data in a lot of different settings to kind of fill in blanks on how long things are going to take when I didn't have access to the data, and it has been remarkably accurate. Now, That said, every situation is a little bit different, and you do have to make sure that you think about it carefully. But you can use Jones's data for that. Pick up any one of his books. One of my favorites is Estimating Software Costs. Obviously, that's very applicable from an estimation point of view. And he recently wrote a book, The Economics of Software Quality, which has some interesting metrics related to quality in it, which is another one worth picking up. And I was privileged to do a review of that book before it was published and get Capers and his co-author some comments on it. So I really highly recommend the book. It was worth every minute I spent reading it. He's also working on a new book now on history of software engineering, and I'm avidly waiting to see what he comes up with there, because I read some kind of excerpts of that earlier in this. He's really on to some great stuff. Let's see. Noel asks, is the seminar recorded? When I just answered that. Will the slides be sent out? No, the slides are not sent out. A PDF of the slides is available now on the basic library. Go to rvcs-us.com, navigate to the resources tab. From there, navigate to the library, and there to the basic library. PDF found at the bottom. Let's see. We've got a comment here. Spinning globe is very distracting on the slides. I guess you're talking about what's in the upper right hand. Sometimes people say that, but most people don't seem to mind it. But if enough people send me an email saying, I hate the spinning globe, and I'm afraid that it's going to cause somebody in my office to have an epileptic attack, and it's just horrible, make it go away, then I might. Let's see. Rama asks, can we estimate without regression test effort? Well, sure. If you don't want to do any regression testing, then you don't have to include any regression test effort in your estimate. But that doesn't tend to be a very good idea, right? I mean, if you are by some chance working on a sequential lifecycle model project and you are delivered software that is so bloody good that you run all of your tests once and they all pass and there's no bugs to fix and there aren't any last-minute features that come dropping in when you're in the middle of testing, then I guess you won't need to worry about regression risk. Pardon the sarcasm, but it's just sort of a natural mode for me. But that's not the reality that I've ever lived in, Rama, and I don't think that that's the reality that most people live in. I think the reality is that even in sequential lifecycle models, you get stuff and then you get more stuff after you've started system tests. The assumption, I don't think I've ever worked on a sequential lifecycle model project where the entry criteria of 100% feature complete prior to starting system test was ever honored, which is why it's actually my opinion that people that criticize sequential lifecycle models, it's like, well, I don't know that they've ever actually been tried, so I don't know that we can actually criticize them, because I've never worked on a project that actually followed that. There was always some amount of dripping in of features later, which destabilizes the code base. And there's always bugs found anyway. Even if you could get feature complete, you're always going to find bugs, which means changes to the code, which means, again, more regression risk. And then, of course, if you're in a agile life cycle, then, geez, I mean, the code base is just getting hammered over and over and over again. And, yeah, there's automated unit tests in place if agile best practices are being followed. But given that Capers-Jones's studies have shown that even the most effective unit tests can only find and remove 50% of the defects, that's only going to mitigate half of the increased regression risk. So ultimately, I think you've got to think about what's adequate mitigation for the regression risk and how long is that going to take and how am I going to go about it? Manual versus automated, how frequently I'm going to do it. I think just staying, I'm going to assume that nothing is going to get broken by changes is not really well connected to historical software engineering realities. So the estimate really does need to reflect what is actually going to happen, not what might happen in some theoretical nice world. Now, I got a question from Arifa here. Can you explain the commercial of the shelf, please? Arifa, I'm sorry. I am completely mystified. I'm afraid I do not understand this. If you can try rephrasing this question a little bit so that I'm missing something here. I don't understand the commercial. I don't understand the word commercial, and I don't understand the word shelf. I'm not sure what you're referring to with respect to shelf. So if you could maybe rephrase that a little bit, or tell me which specific figures you're confused by, I can go back and try to re-explain them. Trish asks, what if you don't have historical records? I think I kind of addressed that. Well, then there's the follow-on. Are there historical records or reports of testing times available? I think I kind of addressed that, Trish, with my response with respect to using Capers-Jones's figures and other industry averages to try to fill in blanks. I would recommend using reputable, published figures. And by published, I don't mean some Yahoo hung it out there on the Internet. I mean, it was published in a book that was not, just thrown together and put on PDF format out on somebody's website, but a book that was actually published by a notable, reputable author that you can use. There's all sorts of really crappy, completely unreliable numbers floating around out there, and then the worst are if you look at recommendations in terms of what the tester to developer ratio should be. That's. I saw an entire presentation by a couple folks from HP, and their names are escaping me at this point. I apologize. It was all about why those tester to developer ratios were so unreliable. So, be careful with numbers scraped off of the Internet. A lot of times they're, worth exactly what you paid for them. Let's see. I got a number of questions about sharing the slides in the presentation, which I believe I have addressed. Got a question from Paul here. What techniques have you used to estimate defect, rework efforts, and duration? Well, what you would need to do is you'd have to have the number of bugs, the estimated number of bugs, and then the estimated time to fix them, and to find them and fix them, as shown on that slide. That'd be something you'd need to have to begin with, and then you'd need to have some way of figuring out what the typical time is to report a defect, what the typical time is to confirmation test a defect, what the typical time is to fix the defect. And I think that's probably those are probably numbers that you could get reasonably reliable numbers from just using a Delphic Oracle technique, just talking to a sufficient number of testers and developers about those and how long those things took. That's what I would do. And then if I needed to come up with a number, and that's definitely a good number to have, because you want to be able to distinguish between what are called your costs of internal failure versus your costs of detection. So the costs of detection are the costs associated with testing that you would pay even if you didn't find any defects, and the costs of internal failure are the costs that you pay because you found defects. And this is important in cost of quality analysis. And if you could come up with those numbers, I mean, basically the cost to find and report a defect, the cost to fix a defect, and the cost to confirmation test a defect, and add those up, multiply it by the estimated number of defects, and that's your estimated cost of internal failure for a given test cycle. All of the other effort that's expended is your cost of detection. Let's see. Dwight asked, Dwight, good to hear from you again. Hope you had a great rest of the conference. I saw Dwight at the STP conference in Miami briefly, unfortunately, just for a day. I had to jet off to South Africa, but it was good to have a face to put with the name, Dwight. So Dwight asks, have you ever seen function point analysis used for estimating testing? Well, I know that it's described, the use of function point analysis for estimation of testing is described. For example, it's in the TMAP book. I think it's the old version of the TMAP book, though not necessarily the new one. It's called test point analysis, and it uses function points as an input. I've used it once or twice as a consultant, but it was purely estimated function point counts, and it wasn't as part of an estimate so much as it was a comparing how long testing actually took to how long the test point analysis model would have predicted it was going to take. Basically, did it, how much longer did it take than one might have expected based on the test point analysis model. So I have not actually used it or seen a client use it in advance to predict how long testing was going to take, which is, I think, what you're actually asking about. I would be interested in anybody who's got success or failure stories about function point analysis and test point analysis, and if you send some of those to me, I can post them on my blog. Let's see. I got a question from Brajesh here. Several estimates carried out for testing, especially for the entire life cycle, do not contain time estimates for reviews, review of test plan, review of test cases, etc. Is there a way we can have stakeholders buy into the idea of baking the estimates for reviews into the overall estimates? Well, yeah, Brajesh. I mean, basically, this comes down to the business case for reviews, right? And usually the strongest business case for a review is going to be you come up with the cost of finding and fixing a defect in review. And again, you could use the kind of Delphic Oracle technique that I discussed just a moment ago with respect to the time to find, fix, and confirmation test a bug. So you look at what's the time to fix a defect in a review, and then compare that to what's the time required to find, fix, and confirmation test a defect in test, and then compare that to what's our cost of external failure on average per defect, which you look at your use cost of quality to determine what a production failure costs. And basically you can say if we find and remove a defect in reviews, it at least saves us the difference between the cost of removing it in test versus the cost of a review, which will often be a very significant number. I mean, it's not unusual to see that a defect found in test can cost like $1,000. A defect cost in a review could be maybe $50. So, yeah, an opportunity to save $950 at least, and then if that same defect makes it out into production, then the savings is the difference between the cost of the defect in production versus the cost of a defect in a review, which is generally going to be even more than that. It's going to be on the order of thousands of dollars. So you can build a business case for reviews really quickly that way with those estimated numbers, and then at that point you can sell people on the, hey, we've got to include this stuff in our plans and estimates because it ain't just going to happen. Let's see. Irma says, thank you for a great presentation. You are very welcome, Irma. I've enjoyed doing it. Deborah asks, what is the name of your book that covers this subject? Okay, so there's two now, and there will be a third. So the two that are out now, one is the Managing the Testing Process, third edition. That's out now and it's available. It talks about estimation. There's also a Advanced Software Testing Volume 2, which is the one about test management. It also talks about estimation. The upcoming book that I'm working on with Debbie Friedenberg is called Expert Test Manager, and that's going to be out early next year, and that's also going to talk about estimation at an expert level. So you'd probably make sense to read either Advanced Software Testing Volume 2 or Managing a Testing Process before you moved on to that one, because it's more advanced than that. And then also, as I said, we have a 2-day training course for software test estimation, and one of and that course is available as an e-learning, and you can get that on our website. So you could also go through the e-learning of that, and that would then include the note set that would explain all of these topics, and that really goes into more detail than any of the books will on estimation. So if you wanted the sort of the full immersion, then that would be the way to go. Giselle asks, Rex, can you please repeat the sources of your industry standards? So that's Capers Jones, C-A-P-E-R-S, Jones, J-O-N-E-S, especially estimating software costs and the economics of software quality. Let's see. Afrisa says, thanks for the webinar. You are welcome. Irma asks, how can we generate good, accurate estimates without historical data? I would assume experience and negotiations will be a big part of it. Yes. So if you've got access to the industry data, as I said, you can use that to fill in blanks. You use your experience and reasonable assumptions to try to fill in blanks. When I say fill in blanks, I mean to estimate data that you wish you had but you don't, like how long on average does it take to report a bug, how long on average does it take to fix a bug, how long on average does it take to confirmation test a bug. And then, yes, negotiation. I mean, being able to negotiate with people is a big part of getting these estimates solid. Now, you know, that said, I mean, this definitely is something that you can master, and you know, you will be able to do this if you put your mind to it and spend the time on it. I'll tell you one way to get to be really good at estimating is work for a testing services provider or other consulting company that has to do fixed bid estimation, fixed bid contracts. You learn really, really quickly how to get a good estimate together, because otherwise you end up just really taking it in the teeth. So, you know, that's sort of the extreme way to learn it. Let's see. Pavel asks, could you please give more details about this mixed method of Delphic, Oracle, and three-point estimation? Yeah, that's called the wideband technique. And what you're going to do is it's the same process as the Delphic Oracle, but instead of asking people to write down one number that they think is the expected case, because that's what they'd be giving you in the standard Delphic Oracle, you ask them to write down three numbers, basically the best case, worst case, and expected case. And then what you can do is you use the expected case, as I mentioned, for your estimation, and then the best case and the worst case allow you to calculate variation. So you'd use like the worst case number and the best case number, if you see what I mean, for each task. And then you put those. You basically create three work breakdown structures: one that has the worst case numbers, one that has the best case numbers, and one that has the expected case numbers generated through work in the Delphic Oracle process. And you're going to look at that cone of uncertainty that comes out of the variance between the best case, worst case, and expected case. Okay. So Kathleen hates the spinning globe. Colin hates the spinning globe. Yuri says the spinning globe is only moderately annoying. We've got G. Henrik, get rid of spinning globe. Spinning globe barely noticeable, says Kathy. Lance has no problem with the spinning globe. Ig says the spinning globe is disturbing. So maybe we have to rethink the spinning globe. Let's see. Abhishek says, I thought that kind of project was an urban myth. I think you're referring to the you get it in system test and it's feature complete and you don't find any bugs and nothing has to change and all your tests pass and you release. Yeah, that's definitely an urban myth. And there's about as many of those projects running around out there as there are unicorns. So, you know, It's right up there with dogs that can talk. See, Art says, thanks for presenting this test estimation material and for making a recording available. You are quite welcome. My pleasure. Oh, so here's Arifa's explanation of her comment about the commercial off the shelf. Okay, so that's all right. Commercial off the shelf. All right. Asking about COTS testing. Okay, commercial off-the-shelf software. Testing of commercial off-the-shelf software. Okay, yes. We've got some clarifications there. That does seem to be what was asking. And Arifa says in the tools. Okay, so commercial off-the-shelf software versus the open source tools. Yeah, what I'm talking about there is that remember, if you're going to use commercial off-the-shelf software as part of your test tool set, so they were talking about things like Quality Center, the Rational Functional Tester, Microsoft's Test Foundations tools, those sort of things. You've got issues associated with licensing. You've got issues associated with training. You've got issues associated with annual maintenance fees. All of that stuff has to be thought through in your estimate. And if it's the first time that you're going to be using it, then you've got to include piloting. You've got to include retrospectives and building up stuff that doesn't exist already. So, yeah, you have to make sure that's in there. Now this is true also with the open source ones. Basically, the open source, you take some of the costs off the table with respect to acquisition and so forth, but there are other additional costs that could be on there. So your estimate needs to take that into account. Now, Colin says, I was missing something on the iron triangle example. How do the lines relate to cost, schedule, etc.? Let me go back to that slide here. Oops. Apologies. Here. Yeah, this guy. Okay. So the lengths of the lines don't matter. Okay, it's just a metaphor. Okay, it's just to illustrate a concept here. Basically, what I'm saying is, when we define the features, we essentially draw a box that says that the features are the stuff that's inside this box. This is what's in scope. Okay, and then when we set a target delivery date for those features, we are essentially drawing a line from one wall of that box to another wall of that box. We're laying down a marker there. Now, again, the length of the line doesn't matter. I'm just saying we've defined something that effectively kind of puts a line in there. Now, if I then set a cost, this is how much I'm willing to pay, I'm effectively connecting a new line to the endpoint of the first line and then drawing that to another side of the box. And once I have done that, basically quality is represented, metaphorically speaking, by the line that connects the two unconnected ends of those two lines. In other words, the quality just is what it is. If I have constrained cost, I've constrained schedule, I've constrained features, then the quality that's going to be delivered is basically whatever the quality process capability is of my current software engineering process. Excuse me. So that's all it is. It's just a metaphor saying that if I constrain feature, schedule, and cost, I have to accept whatever level of quality comes out of that process. I can't change that level of quality. It is what it is within normal variation, normal random variation. The only way I can change the level of quality would be to iterate that process and renegotiate the feature, schedule, and cost to try to get a different outcome with respect to quality. I hope that's a little more clear. I apologize if it was unclear. Okay, let's see. How do you predict, Giselle asks, how do you predict the number of bugs that would occur in the project other than the lines of code? What you do, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear on this, pardon me, is you take the number of developer days on past projects, and you look at the number of bugs that were found on that same past project. So let's say you got 10 past projects. So you get 10 numbers for this is how many developer days were spent. That can be sort of coarse-grained by saying, well, we had 10 developers on the project, and they were on the project for 10 months, and so there's 22 days, work days per month, so that's 220 total days times 10 developers, so that's 2,200 developer days. Okay, so that would be one way of doing it. More fine-grained way of doing that, of course, would be if you've got time tracking that you can access. The HR people tend to be a little sensitive about that. So you just estimate the number of developer days on past projects, and then for each project you've got a number of developer days, and then you look at the number of bugs that you found, and you then divide the number of bugs by the number of developer days, and that gives you the number of bugs per developer day. And then what you can do is, if you've got an estimated number of developer days, excuse me, for the current project, you multiply that times the average number of bugs per developer day, and that allows you to predict the number of bugs that you're going to find. Pretty straightforward math. A comment from Art. The spinning globe is only mildly distracting, so some people hate it and some people don't care. So that's kind of interesting. Jerry says, you mentioned Capers Jones often. What book of his would you recommend reading after reading your own excellent books? Well, thank you for that comment, Jerry. Yeah, I think Estimating Software Costs, the third edition of that, excellent read. Economics of Software Quality, the one he just wrote, also an excellent read. And then this forthcoming book that he's working on now about the history of software engineering, when that finally comes out, that's just going to be just great, great stuff. Let's see. A question here from Luis that says it's offline, which I've never seen that before. I've seen has left, but offline I've never seen. At ballpark level estimations, I was told there's almost a 40% ratio between total testing and development effort. Is that accurate based on the current system's complexity and multiple platforms? Yeah, again, these tester to developer ratios are just too context dependent to be reliable. I've seen variation anywhere from 1 to 1 all the way up to 1 to 10, and you know, it's just all over the map. So I do not recommend using those ratios unless you have ratios that you have developed based on reliable historical data within your organization, because that will have accounted for the contextual issues. Let's see, Gene asks, any other literature or tools you would recommend? For example, Watts Humphrey, Barry Bain, Tom DeMarco, Steve McConnell. Yeah, Tom DeMarco is good value. I like his books quite a bit and have read many of them. Always found them very thought-provoking. I think he's a great guy. His co-author on Peopleware, who I'm ashamed to say his name is escaping me at the moment, he's also really good. I like his writing. Liked what he contributed to Peopleware. Let's see. Who else is good? I'm turning around and looking. Stephen Kahn's book, Metrics and Models in Software Quality Engineering, is definitely a good read. The TMAP Next book is, I think, good. I reviewed that when it first came out. That was a good read. And of course, Beiser's stuff, Boris Beiser's books. Software system testing and quality assurance is still a classic, and software test techniques, though it's a little dense, is still a good read. I got time for one last question here, and I'm gonna show some favoritism to a client here. My buddy Mike Lyles at Lowe's. Good to hear from you, Mike. I hope you're doing well. Rex, are there metrics and reporting tools out there to support comparing the estimation of effort with the actuals at the end of the project lifecycle? Thinking this could be used for future estimation effort. Well, of course, a tool like Microsoft Project will allow you to show actuals versus estimated with respect to dates, because you can set a baseline and then show, when you track what actually happened compared to your baseline. Now, in terms of budgeting, you could use Excel, and track, budget per month and actual per month, and look at how you're doing there. For larger efforts, that might not be sufficient. There's the CA tool, Clarity, which I think is a project tracking tool that I expect has some of this capability built into it, that you could look at for larger projects. Excuse me. I suspect that to be something that would be worthwhile. Okay. So we've reached the end of our allocated time. As always, great questions from a great and engaged audience. It's a lot of fun. Tried to make the presentation go a little quicker today so that we could get more time for questions, and we still have plenty of questions, so that's great. So this is the presentation. We're going to have to wind it down. To close this session, let me tell you a little bit more about the resources available. The free webinars happen once a month, so check our website, rbcs-us.com. You can sign up there. If you want a special webinar presentation for your company only of this webinar or on any other topic, send me an email at info@rbcs-us.com or via our website. Just did one of these for HP this morning. If you don't already receive our regular free newsletter, sign up at rbcs-us.com. This gets you valuable discounts on our services and a regular newsletter about what we're up to, and a featured article about software testing and quality. We're at RBCS on Twitter, Facebook, or RBCS-INC. Do check your email. You might be the lucky winner of a free e-learning course. You will register simply by attending. You can check out my blog, rbcs-us.com/blog. Post comments or email me topics that you'd like to discuss. And as I said, Digital Library has recorded webinars, podcasts, and videos. We're on iTunes. Enter RBCS podcast into the search string, or you can subscribe to the RBCS channel on YouTube. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. That concludes the webinar today. Thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year. We will be kicking off our webinar series with talk about the new ISTQB Advanced Syllabus in January, and hope you all tune in for that. Thanks, and have a great day.